Somewhere in a garage right now, there's a motorcycle built in 1975 that fires up on the second kick. No laptop, no dealership diagnostic, no error code flashing on a screen, just a twist of the throttle, a little choke, and that unmistakable AR-cooled rumble. Meanwhile, some brand new machines sitting in showrooms today, bikes with more computing power than the Apollo missions, will be completely dead in 20 years. Not because the engine failed, because a $15 sensor went bad and nobody makes the replacement anymore. That sounds backwards, right? The old bike keeps running and the futuristic one becomes a paperweight. But once you understand how these machines are actually built, it stops being a mystery and starts being kind of obvious. So let's talk about why a motorcycle from the disco era is going to outlast almost everything rolling off the assembly line today. Picture a vintage Honda CB750 or a Kawasaki Z1 parked in a sunlit workshop, chrome pipes gleaming, that classic teardrop tank catching the light. These bikes came out of a very specific moment in engineering history, and that moment is exactly why they refuse to die. Let's start with the heart of the thing. The engine. A typical motorcycle engine from the 1970s is air-cooled and carbureted, and those two words carry more weight than you'd think. Air-cooled means there's no radiator, no coolant, no water pump, no hoses to crack and leak. The engine just uses those beautiful finned cylinders to shed heat into the passing air. Fewer parts, fewer failure points. You can see the whole system just by looking at it. Carbureted means fuel and air get mixed by a mechanical device that works on pure physics. Airflow, pressure, gravity. There's no computer deciding how much fuel to inject. There's a needle, a float, and a few jets. If it gets gummed up after sitting for a decade, you pull it apart on your kitchen table, clean it with carb cleaner and a bit of wire, put it back together, and it runs again. A high schooler with a screwdriver and a Sunday afternoon can master a carburetor. Now compare that to a modern bike. Liquid-cooled engine with a full cooling system that can fail. Fuel injection controlled by an electronic control unit. Sensors monitoring throttle position, oxygen levels, crank angle, engine temperature, air pressure, wheel speed, lean angle. It's genuinely impressive engineering. A modern sport bike making 200 horsepower from a liter of displacement is a mechanical miracle. But every one of those sensors is a thing that can quietly die. And when it does, the whole bike often just refuses to run. That's the fundamental split we're going to keep coming back to. The old bike is simple, the new bike is smart, and simple survives. Let's dig into the ignition, because this is where it gets really telling. On a lot of 1970s motorcycles, the ignition is analog. Points and condensers, or on the later ones, some basic transistorized ignition. The spark that fires the cylinder gets triggered by mechanical timing you can see and adjust with a feeler gauge and a timing light. If something drifts out of spec, you fix it in your driveway with hand tools. There's no software involved anywhere. A modern motorcycle's ignition runs entirely through the ECU. That little computer brain decides the exact microsecond each spark plug fires, adjusting constantly based on all those sensor readings. When it works, it's flawless. But that ECU is a sealed electronic module, and here's the uncomfortable part. Electronics don't age gracefully. Capacitors dry out. Solder joints develop micro cracks from years of vibration and heat cycling. Circuit boards corrode. And when a 30-year-old ECU finally gives up, you can't rebuild it on your workbench. You need a replacement. And if the manufacturer stopped making that specific part 15 years ago, you're hunting through salvage yards and online forums praying someone parted out the exact same model. The old bike's spark will be firing long after the new bike's brain has gone dark. Which brings us to the single biggest reason these vintage machines win the long game: repairability. A 1970s motorcycle was designed to be worked on by a human being with a basic toolbox. Everything is accessible. You can reach the carburetors without removing half the bike. The engine cases split in ways that make sense. The wiring is a simple loom you can trace with your finger and a test light. Torque a bolt, adjust a chain, set the valve clearances with a feeler gauge and basic hand tools. The service manual is a book, not a subscription. Modern bikes increasingly require a manufacturer diagnostic tool just to communicate with the machine. Want to know why the check engine light is on? You need the dealer's proprietary software plugged into the bike's port. Some maintenance procedures literally can't be completed without the electronics being reset by a computer. The bike won't let you. You are locked out of your own machine unless you pay someone with the right laptop. Think about what that means over 50 years. The vintage bike can be kept alive by anybody, anywhere, forever, as long as they can turn a wrench. The modern bike is only serviceable as long as the manufacturer keeps supporting the software and selling the tools, and companies don't support old models forever, not even close. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. I dig into the stuff behind the machines every single week, and there's a lot more where this came from. Now let's talk about what these old bikes were actually made of. Here is something people forget about the 1970s. It was the tail end of an era where machines were overbuilt on purpose. Engineers did not have the computer modeling to shave every component down to the theoretical minimum, so they erred on the side of making it stronger than it needs to be. The result is engine cases you could practically hit with a hammer, forged steel crankshafts built tough enough to shrug off decades of abuse, and frames welded with way more metal than a modern computer-optimized design would ever allow. You can see it in the metal itself. Steel fenders, aluminum engine cases with real heft to them, chrome-plated steel exhausts. These bikes have weight and substance because they are made of honest materials that were never meant to be disposable. Nobody in 1975 was designing a motorcycle to be thrown away in 10 years. They built them to be handed down. Now walk through a modern showroom and look closely. Plenty of gorgeous machines, absolutely. But so much of what you are seeing is plastic cladding. Bodywork designed to be lightweight and cheap to mold, hiding the mechanical bits underneath. Some of it is genuinely tough. A lot of it gets brittle with UV exposure and cracks, and once a specific fairing panel is discontinued, good luck finding a replacement that fits. The old bike wears its metal proudly. The new bike hides its engine behind plastic that ages worse than the machine underneath it. And here's a related advantage that quietly matters enormously. Parts interchangeability. Motorcycle manufacturers in the 1970s used the same components across huge ranges of models and years. The same carburetor, the same switchgear, the same bearings and seals showing up on a dozen different bikes. That means the parts ecosystem is enormous and forgiving. Need a fork seal for a 1976 model? The same seal fits 4 other bikes, so somebody's always making them. And the aftermarket is thriving with reproduction parts because there's a huge community of people keeping these bikes alive. Modern motorcycles change platforms constantly. A part from last year's model often won't fit this year's because the electronics, the mounting points, and the software all shifted. Great for selling new bikes. Terrible for keeping a 15-year-old one running once the factory support dries up. There's a human factor here too, and I love this part. The 1970s created a whole culture of the rider as mechanic. When you owned one of these bikes, you learned to fix it because that's just what you did. The knowledge got passed around garages and eventually onto the internet, where today there are forums with 30 years of accumulated wisdom on every quirk of every model. Somebody out there has solved every problem your vintage bike could ever have, and they wrote it down. That collective knowledge is a form of immortality. These bikes will keep running because an army of enthusiasts refuses to let them stop. Now, I want to be fair here because I'm not trying to tell you the old days were perfect and everything modern is garbage. That would be nonsense. Modern motorcycles are genuinely better in almost every measurable performance category. They're faster. They stop harder thanks to ABS and radial brakes that would embarrass anything from 1975. They handle better on sophisticated suspension. Traction control and ride modes make them dramatically safer, especially in the rain or for less experienced riders. They pollute a fraction of what an old carbureted bike does, which matters a lot for the air we all breathe. They start reliably every single morning without any choke fiddling or kickstarting rituals, and they'll go tens of thousands of miles with almost no maintenance while they're young. So if the question is, which bike is better to ride today? The modern machine wins a lot of those rounds. No argument. But that's not actually the question we're asking. The question is, which one will outlast the other? Which one will still be running in 50 years? And that's a completely different contest, because the very things that make modern bikes so good today are the same things that make them fragile in the long run. All that performance comes from complexity. The traction control, the ride modes, the fuel injection, the ABS, they all depend on sensors and computers and software, and every one of those systems is a countdown timer. It works beautifully right up until the moment it doesn't, and when it fails, it usually can't be fixed by hand. You're at the mercy of parts availability and manufacturer support that has an expiration date. There's a reason for that expiration date, and it's not an accident, it's a business model. The motorcycle industry, like the car industry and the phone industry, and basically every industry now, has drifted toward planned obsolescence. Not always as a cartoon villain scheme, but as the natural result of how modern products get designed. When a machine is built around proprietary electronics and software, the manufacturer controls its lifespan. They decide when to stop making parts. They decide when to stop supporting the diagnostic tools. They decide when your perfectly good machine becomes officially unserviceable. And every bike that dies is a nudge toward buying a new one. The 1970s manufacturers had no such control, and honestly, no such intention. They sold you a machine, handed you a manual, and expected you to keep it running for decades. The ownership of the bike was actually yours, all the way down to the last bolt. That philosophy is baked into the metal, and it's why those bikes are still out there today, running, when the business model that made them has long since disappeared. So let's define what outlast really means, because I think it's the key to this whole thing. Outlasting isn't about which bike is fastest off the line today. It's about which machine can still be started, repaired, and ridden the longest into the future. And by that definition, the 1970s motorcycle wins in a landslide. It wins because it's simple enough to fix, honest enough in its materials to endure, common enough in its parts to keep supplied, and beloved enough by its community to never be abandoned. It was built in an era that measured quality in decades by people who assumed you'd still own the thing when your kids were grown. The modern bike is a marvel, but it's a marvel with a shelf life. It's a machine that borrows its brilliance from electronics that will fade, from software that will lose support, from a manufacturer whose interest in keeping it alive ends the day the warranty does. That vintage machine we started with, chrome gleaming, finned cylinders catching the light, will fire up on the second kick long after today's showroom heroes have gone silent. Not because it's better, because it's simpler. And in the long, brutal test of time, simple is the thing that survives. So here's what I want you to do. Next time you see an old bike rumbling down the road, one of those beautiful air-cooled machines from 50 years ago, give it a nod. Because it's not just an old motorcycle, it's a survivor, and it's going to outlive almost everything built today. If this changed how you look at these machines even a little, do me one favor and subscribe. I break down the engineering behind the stuff we ride every week, and I'd love to have you along for the next one. See you there.